The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClapper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.
This is the Movie Health Podcast where we talk about movies and mental health. I'm Kathryn, and today I'm very happy to re-interview a former guest of the pod, Vanessa Bowen. I interviewed Vanessa in episode 15 of season 1 about her book Apple Pies and Other Lies, and we explored teen movies from the 90s to 2000s, which continue to powerfully shape perceptions of sexuality. Vanessa is a grief and loss counsellor. She runs a private practice called Fairy Wren Counselling and specialises in providing support and comfort to people who have experienced a significant loss in their life. Welcome again, Vanessa. It's so good to discuss movies and mental health with you again.
It's wonderful to be here again.
Thank you so much. Today you chose the movie Big Hero 6. I'm just really curious if you would like to introduce the movie.
Yeah, so Big Hero 6 is an animated movie and it deals with themes of grief and loss as well as themes of ambition and chosen family.
I love that. It was the first time that I watched it, but I know that it's acclaimed. People love it. It's a great Disney film. It's very heartwarming. It's very funny. It's an action comedy with like science fiction elements, obviously, directed by Don Hall and Chris Williams, and it stars Ryan Potter, Jamie Chung, T.J. Miller, James Cromwell, Damon Wayans Jr., and Maya Rudolph. There are a number of characters in the movie, obviously including the 6 heroes of the film, which is why it's called Big Hero 6. But who would you choose as your favorite character? Or maybe if that's too hard, favorite characters?
I really identify with the character Honey Lemon. So she's not one of the main characters. She's sort of in the background, but I really love her very gentle and empathetic manner. I just think she's got such a lovely demeanour.
Yeah,
and she's always sort of in the background. You see her like making cups of tea for people and providing comfort. She's very gentle, yeah.
Yes, yeah. I think when she's first introduced in the movie, like you can tell that she has that personality and you're drawn to her straight away. She has like a real empathy to her. I know she was voiced by Genesis Rodriguez, who I don't know who that actress is, but
No.
there's also like a way to the what do you call it? The way that she speaks as well, like her tone of voice. It's very comforting and reassuring. Was there anything specific about Honey Lemon and the way that she interacts with, let's say, the main character hero that you'd like to talk about?
I feel like of the older characters who sort of rally around Hero when he's going through his grief, she is the person that gives him the most direct comfort. So all of the others help in their own way, but she, I feel, has this really empathic quality where she often gives him a hug, she asks how he's doing, she checks in with him, and I love her softness. And the way that she almost treats him like a little brother.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to describe it, her softness. How about the other characters? So obviously there's Gogo, who is the other female hero, and she's quite different to Honey Lemon. She's a bit
yes.
she's a bit. How would you describe her? Actually, how would you describe her?
I see Gogo as very pragmatic. Like she is no nonsense, get in there, get it done, and just so incredibly quick and clever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's Wasabi, such an interesting name, and Fred. So those other characters, because I know obviously they're all formed to create a team to kind of help save the world. And anyway, we won't spoil it for people, but what would you say about the other scientists who ends up becoming the other heroes with Hero?
I really love the interplay between Wasabi and Gogo because while they're both incredibly clever and very intelligent, Wasabi is so much more ordered and cautious, and I feel that he tempers Gogo a little bit. They work really nicely together, where sometimes she pushes him forward when he needs a shove, and he pulls
Mhm.
her back when she needs to just sort of hang back and wait a moment. Like, there's
Yeah,
this really
yeah.
nice balance between the two of them.
Yeah, and I guess with Hero being the main character, he's a young genius. He's with science and technology, he has like a precociousness about him. He's very uniquely talented, and I guess it's kind of clear that he kind of gets that from his brother Tadashi, who I don't want to say something that spoils the movie as well, but
Yeah.
I think Tadashi, creates a robot which is like a healthcare companion called Baymax, and Baymax is a very intriguing character, very very lovable, very huggable, as
Yes.
Tadashi describes him. Um, I would have to say that one of my favorite scenes is when Baymax is introduced. What would you have to say about that scene? Because I mean, there's so much that we can talk about in terms of like healthcare and everything when it comes to the creation of this robot. But I'm curious what you have to say
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
I also really love the scene that introduces Baymax, because I feel as though Hero is very aware of how intelligent he is and what he's capable of. And
Hmm.
he almost has this skepticism when he sees Baymax for the first time. He's obviously impressed that his brother's made this fantastic creation, but
Hmm.
he deliberately tries to trip him up a few times. He asks questions that he doesn't think Baymax will be able to respond to. And when he does, you see the respect that Hero has for this amazing creation and how intricate it is. And like, quickly you start to see a relationship form between Baymax and Hero.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
was actually watching some of the behind the scenes footage of all the voice actors, and it's really interesting because they didn't have to edit the person who's was Baymax. Like it was
Yeah.
literally his voice, and I think that was incredible.
Yes.
Because there's a certain like humanness about it. There's a sincerity. What did you think about the later interactions between Hero and Baymax? Because I think obviously their friendship started to bond, and they really started to rely on each other. And it became
Yes.
a strong connection. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm when after um, Tadashi passes away, that's when the relationship between Hiro and Baymax really starts to flourish.
Mhm.
And in a way, Baymax sort of acts as a stand-in for Tadashi in some
Yeah.
ways. Like, he has that really gentle, caring presence in Hiro's life, but there's also like, it's a reciprocal relationship, because even though Baymax is a computer and a robot, he can still learn, and so
Mhm.
Hero is teaching him things, and the interactions between the two of them are hilarious, but also really touching in some ways.
Yeah, yeah, and I like how you mentioned that. He teaches him, and in many ways they teach each other.
Absolutely.
And they really do learn many lessons about life with each other. So, like, there are scenes which demonstrate certain themes. So, for me, I took courage out of it: resilience, perseverance, obviously brotherhood,
Yes.
loyalty, and loss. Are there specific scenes and/or themes that you'd like to mention today?
There's one, when we talk about grief and loss, there's one scene in particular that always stands out to me, and that is the first time that you see Baymax and Hiro interact with one another after Tadashi has died. And
Hmm.
Baymax notices that Hiro is grieving. He notices that the reduction in his mood. And I really like the way that he responds to that, because even though Baymax is programmed to be a healthcare professional and fix people who are injured or ill, he recognizes
Hmm.
that he can't fix Hero's loss. He can support him and he can help him move through it, but he can't repair what's been lost. And I really love that, because as a grief counselor, that's a big part of my work, is understanding that you can't repair what a person has lost, but you can support them as they move through it. And I think Baymax does such a beautiful job of doing that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think, there's a depiction of depression as well after Tadashi's death, because we see Hiro, he's withdrawing from his projects, he's not going to school, he's also isolating himself from his friends. Did you want to speak more about that kind of depiction around depression and loss within the film?
Yeah, the way that it depicts Hero's mood, his demeanor, and as you say, the way that he withdraws from these projects and his social circle is
Mm-hmm.
very typical of people who have experienced a significant loss. Because
Mm-hmm.
even if you're surrounded by people who care about you, every loss it's an individual experience, and we go through it alone. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is really common to see people really draw into themselves and find it very difficult to find connection again. It takes some time
Yeah.
for them to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I notice even the other character, Aunt Cass, who takes care of Hero. She It's really interesting how she's portrayed as well, and how she's kind of accepts it. She goes with the flow of it. She kind of just lets Hero be without being pushy or
Yeah.
anything. Was there anything you want to
Yes.
say about that, like that family relationship?
Yeah, I think the dynamic between Hero and Aunt Cass is really interesting
Hmm.
because, um, so Hero and Tadashi, their parents passed away. I think they say 10 years prior to the
Mm.
beginning of the movie, so they've experienced loss before. Um, and Aunt Kaz, like you say, she is so loving and so caring to Hero, but she does allow him to do things in his own time. She's not trying to pressure him.
Hmm.
She makes gentle suggestions and invitations, but she's not trying to
Yeah.
shove him to do things that he's not ready for. And it is interesting because in Aunt Kaz, sometimes when people go through a loss, we sort of oscillate between two phases. So we go through phases
Mm.
where we are in deep grieving, but then we also have to do the pragmatic tasks of day to day life. Like she continues running her restaurant, she's still looking after the household, she's still caring for Hero. And particularly for adults who are in caring roles, you do have to be able to oscillate between both. Um, Most
Mm.
people are not able to completely put everything on hold in order to process
Yeah.
grief. They have to devote time to those day to day tasks, and we see how deeply the loss of Tadashi has affected her as well. But she's
Hmm.
also continuing on with their day to day life because she has to.
Yeah. She has that caregiver element, like you said. Yeah, she has to, she's grieving herself individually, and she's also trying to manage and support Hero in his grief. I know that
Yeah,
the 5 stages of grief is talked about so much. It's kind of become a meme in many ways. Everyone talks about it. And I
yeah.
know in your work, is there, is there anything in particular that you see with the 5 stages and how it's depicted in the film?
Yeah, it is really interesting because I think the 5 stages is a useful thing to talk about. And like you say,
Mm,
everybody knows about it. But we also now in grief counseling don't really use the 5 stages anymore. They've become somewhat
mm,
outdated, which is not to say the five
yeah.
emotions that it depicts, they're very, very common and most people will experience all five, but they might move in and out of those emotions. It's not five distinct stages that happen one after another. And sometimes people
Yeah.
can feel quite confused because
Mm,
they might experience distress because they're like, well, I haven't felt angry and I'm supposed, I feel depressed, but I'm supposed to feel angry before I feel depressed. And allowing
that's
people to feel things in the order that they feel them. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
and it's interesting
Sorry.
because the film does show quite early on how depressed Hero becomes and how withdrawn he becomes. But later
Mm,
on in the film, we really see that anger and that fire and the
mm,
desire to blame. And we
yes.
see that not only in Hero, we also see that in one of the other characters who has experienced a loss as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's really important that you mentioned that. Like, it's not a linear process. It's not that sometimes like we skip over it. We feel complex emotions, all of them at once. And yeah, I
Yes.
think that's really important to remember. Um, so obviously with cinema therapy and everything, I'm curious. Have you used Big Hero 6 within your sessions with clients?
I haven't, no, but I can
Mm,
see that it could be a really useful tool, especially for young people who might be experiencing grief and loss, to demonstrate what it can be like to go through that. And I think it's also a really useful tool for people who are supporting somebody else through a loss to show what can be helpful to help them move through that experience.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, if you were to use it within your counseling sessions, I'm curious how you would do that.
I think I would focus on the scenes where you see interaction between Baymax and Hero, and the way
Hmm.
that Baymax speaks about how he's going to support Hero, because I think he's such a beautiful example of how we can do that without rushing into to fix. And so for somebody who is maybe a caregiver, or somebody who is looking after, or supporting somebody through a loss, watching those scenes together and reflecting on the way that Baymax behaves could be really, really useful.
Hmm. Hmm. Is there, a very specific scene that you have in mind that you would want to show clients? I know, obviously, the like you said, the scenes between Hero and Baymax, but is there like a specific one that you think really is the standout when it comes to grief and loss?
I love the scene, and again, I don't want to spoil anything, but getting towards the end,
Mm.
where Hero finds so Baymax has basically a memory chip which has all his programming on it, and on that chip is video recordings of
Mm.
Tadashi testing out the prototypes of Baymax, and just seeing the excitement and sadness in Hero when he sees those recordings of his brother
Mm.
after so long, because it's so important to maintain those ongoing connections with the people that we've lost. And it just feels like such a gift to Hero when he sees that footage and is able to reconnect with his brother in a way that he hadn't been able to previously.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful, insightful scene, and I know that prior to that, Hero also he kind of started on his path of violence.
Hmm.
He wanted revenge, but then
Yeah,
seeing that of his brother actually made him realize the reason why Tadashi created Baymax in the first place and the whole purpose of it. So he decided to go the other route, and I think that really kind of
yeah,
was the fork in the road moment, wasn't it? Where he decided,
absolutely.
yeah.
And sometimes when people have experienced a loss of somebody that's close to them, a way that they can maintain that ongoing connection is either by carrying on the work that that person was
Mm,
doing, or by incorporating elements of who that person was, their values, in the way that they live their life, and reminders of that person.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like Big Hero 6 really shows Hero taking on that message of and Tadashi's values, and really infuses that into his own work.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then obviously that's empowered, by the other characters as well. They all kind of want to, um,
Like, sort of, in a way, I guess, immortalize Tadashi's work, and support
yes,
Hero in doing that. Because at the
exactly.
same time, even though Hero's lost his brother, they've all lost a close friend. Like, all of
Yeah,
them are grieving for that person.
that's right. That's right. And there's other interesting characters in the movie as well. There's Robert Callahan, who was like the head of the institute, and then there's the antagonist, Alistair Cray. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to speak to about these specific characters, because I know that Robert Callahan, he believes that he's lost his daughter,
Yes.
in the film, but then later finds out that he hasn't, but then he's gone through his own journey, where he's kind of abandoned his morals and his integrity, through trying to avenge his daughter. But what was there anything you wanted to talk about with those characters as well?
Yeah, I find Callahan in particular very, very interesting, because
Mm,
he really has gone down that route of finding somebody to blame, seeking
mm,
revenge over a loss that has impacted him deeply. And I feel like that
mhm,
really gives Hero a glimpse into what things could be if he also continues down that path. And
mhm,
again, without wanting to spoil too much, Hero makes a very real choice between gaining revenge over somebody that he believes is responsible for his brother's death, or he can give Callahan redemption, and he makes the choice to give that hope and that redemption to Callahan rather than continuing down a path of revenge and blame.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I know that, there's many movies that we've talked about in the past as well, but apart from Big Hero 6, are there other ones, like animated or otherwise, that you would recommend to people during a time of grief and mourning?
Yeah, there are a lot of movies that cover grief and loss. I've chosen 3, and funnily enough, 2 of them are animated Disney Pixar. So the first one I've chosen is Coco, which I think is just such a beautiful depiction, not only of immediate loss but ongoing mourning and remembering people who have passed away.
Yeah.
The second one I've chosen is Up, which I think is just such a beautiful depiction of, once again, taking an idea, a quest, or a purpose from somebody who is no longer with you and making that your own. And the third one I've chosen is Little Women, I think. And there are many versions of Little Women, but all of them deal with grief and loss, and the loss of a sibling specifically.
Right.
And once again, incorporating that loss into a work of art or a continuing something that lives on after that person's gone.
That's so true. I know Up. I had a feeling you were going to say Up because I feel that that's one of the real main films that people go to.
Yes.
Such a beautiful movie. I'm curious. Little Women. Little Women.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that and its relevance to grief and loss?
Yeah. So funnily enough, Little Women is my favourite book of all time, and there are so many. It's been made into at least 5 movies that I can think of. But in that movie, it's about 4 sisters who have a very close relationship. And throughout the course of the story, one of the sisters dies quite young. And her elder sister, who is the protagonist of the story, is deeply affected by her passing. And the sister that is left behind, is a writer and is struggling to think of an idea to turn into a book that will be accepted by a publisher, and she chooses to, I guess, immortalize the lives of her sisters and their childhood in her novel.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Yeah, I know that I saw the latest one, if it is the latest one, with Emma Watson.
Yes.
Yeah. Love that movie.
It was
Very good.
beautifully made.
Oh, so good. Yeah, and I think have you seen all of them? Have you seen all 5 films?
Yeah, I have. The one that I watch over and over, I think, was made in 1993. So it's got Trini Alvarez, Winona Ryder, Claire Danes, and Kirsten Dunst, which is also a fantastic movie. Yeah, they're all good.
I
they
need
all
to
have
see
strengths.
That movie. Yeah. And it's interesting how they do it a bit differently in each film, but essentially the story is the same.
Yes.
I have to mention, because I know you and I love horror, and I think we'll be having an actual chat about horror. The Babadook, I think is a great movie about grief and loss. Maybe we could talk about it in the next one, but anyway, I think that kind of really stood out to me because there's so much depth to that film, and it's a real horror film.
Absolutely.
But that's about the loss of a father and a husband.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen A Ghost Story with Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it, but that's intriguing.
Yeah. So it's about a wife who loses her husband. It's a very confusing film, but it's also very profound. And I would recommend it because it actually shows you with no kind of filter what grief is like.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Yeah, it's very powerful. I don't know if you've seen the movie King of Staten Island with
No, that's really high on my list to watch, but I haven't watched it yet.
Yes, such a good movie about the loss of a dad as well, and a role model. So yeah, I think I would recommend that as well. All of these aren't animations, but I I thought I'd mentioned those three as well. But I love how you mentioned in terms of grief and loss. I guess we are talking about death, but also there are different types of grief. So whether that's the death of a marriage, the death of any kind of relationship,
Yes.
or even like losing a job, anything like that. I think
Yeah.
movies like Inside Out. I know the second one is coming out, but it's kind of
Absolutely.
transitions, right? Where
Yeah.
you're kind of were there other what's it called? Sorry, today I'm just all over the place. I apologize.
It's Friday morning.
It's Friday. But yeah, actually, okay. My question is, in your work as a grief and loss counselor, was there anything that you want to say is really important within the process of grief, and anything that you've learned in your work that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Oh, look, there's so many things I could say. I am struck the way that sometimes grief shows up in very unexpected ways. So even, we've talked about some of the more common places where it shows up, but I've seen clients who start grieving, say when their children start school, they're grieving
Mm-hmm.
that their children are getting older and they're not babies anymore, or people who move house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Grief shows up in all kinds of ways, and I think it can be really challenging for people to face those feelings of grief and to talk about them if they feel as though they're grieving something that is a bit unusual. Sometimes we might have that feeling that, like, oh, this is a bit silly, I shouldn't be feeling this way about this. And in truth, we all grieve, and all grief is valid, and it's important to honor the uniqueness of each grief experience. No two are alike. And also
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I will see somebody who has experienced multiple losses throughout their life, but the one that they're currently grappling with is hitting them harder. And sometimes people feel confused because they think to themselves, okay, but I've been through this really significant breakup in the past. I've lost a parent, and those were sad, but I got through them. Like, why is this specific experience so hard for me?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about helping people to understand that every experience is different and unique, and the way that we deal with the emotions that come up will be unique depending on what's going on at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very individual experience.
Yeah.
And in Hero's case, how do you think he dealt with his grief?
I think, in many ways, I think that
Mm,
finding connection with the people around him was really important for Hero, because his
mm,
instinct was to withdraw into himself and not have contact with the people around him. And it's when he starts spending time with those people who are close to him that he starts to find a little bit more levity and a little bit more enjoyment and zest for life. But he also, because for him, his work is so important to him and he's very ambitious, after he loses Tadashi and uh, gains Baymax, that
mm,
gives him, it really motivates him to push himself and to create new and bigger things that perhaps he wouldn't have been motivated to do prior
mm,
to Tadashi's death, or the type of project he might have worked on would have been different. And
mm.
I think that he really pours himself into his work using those emotions and using that feeling in a really constructive way.
Yeah, yeah. And with the character of Baymax, because I have to say Baymax is my favorite character
Yeah.
in the film. Was there anything else that we wanted to talk about in regards to him and his approach? And even though he is a robot, he is also quite human. He
Yes.
has a lot of empathy. He has a purpose that he's very committed to. Yeah, was there anything that you wanted to speak about specifically about Baymax?
It I find Baymax so fascinating for so many reasons, but I look at the way that he interacts with Hero in particular, but with all of the characters. And he almost behaves a little bit like a grief counselor in a way, where he doesn't ever tell Hero what to do. He doesn't really offer out and out advice, but he makes very gentle suggestions to him a few times to just be like, is this a good idea? Is this really what you want to do? And he is very much led by Hero. So there's one point where when they sort of begin their quest together and Hero says, this is important to me, this is what I want to do, and Baymax says, will this help? Will this help you? And Hero says yes. And without questioning, Baymax is like, all right, yep, we're gonna do this because it's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's very true. He is like a grief and loss counselor. He's
Yeah.
very client led. He's very
Absolutely.
client led, strengths based, even solutions focused, but not obviously not jumping to solutions, but like
Yes.
ready to collaborate with Hero.
Yes.
That's so true. That's so
And
true.
I love that he starts to pick up. I mean, Hero out and out teaches him little quirks and little things to help them connect, and I love that he takes those on and continues to use them as a way to connect and comfort Hero. Like they really develop like quite a human relationship, even though Baymax is not human.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's why, like, the end of the film is even sadder. But then, of course, it's Disney, so it's going to have a positive ending.
Yes.
Yes. Was there anything that you've learnt from the film, being a grief and loss counselor, or something that you noticed that you also incorporate in your work already, from the Baymax's character?
Yeah, one thing that pops up in the film, I've already mentioned this a little bit, but just how client-led Baymax is. Sometimes it can be very easy to fall into the trap of you talk to a client, you see them, and you think to yourself, I know what you need, I know what will help, but it's really important to ask the person in front of you, what do you need? What would be helpful to you in this moment, and really listening to what they offer. And I love the way that Baymax continually does that, checking in with Hero and making sure that what they're doing together is actually helpful and nurturing for him. He's not just ploughing ahead with what he thinks would be best.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about your work, or about the film?
Ooh, good question. Um, another thing that I thought was really interesting. It's really common when people have experienced a loss that they struggle to find support in the people around them. So in Western culture especially, we are quite uncomfortable with grief, and it can be difficult to know how to support somebody who's close to us that is grieving. And there tend to be sort of this set of almost like predetermined things that people say to somebody who has lost somebody that aren't actually very helpful. And Hero touches on that. He says at one point, people keep saying he's not really gone as long as we remember him. And he's talking about Tadashi, and Hero kind of he waves that away because he's like, this is a thing that people are saying to me. Everyone's saying it, but it's not really connecting. And when I heard him say that, I was like, yeah, that is something that people are told over and over again. And there might be a grain of truth to it, but it's about recognizing that sometimes the things we say to somebody who is grieving might not necessarily be helpful. And what they actually just need is somebody to hear what they have to say.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like what you said, actually asking them what they personally need, rather than kind of imposing or assuming that they need something in particular. And I know I've been looking through, some articles about grief and loss and just like understanding it more. And it's interesting that there's something called choose, connect, communicate. So it's about choosing what's best for you, connecting with others, and communicating your needs.
Yes.
And I think, those steps are obviously, paramount to recovery and to healing. And, as we know, grief is something that we manage. It's not something that we get over.
Yes.
Was there anything you wanted to mention about that? So have you heard of choose, connect, communicate before? I know obviously there's so many
Yeah.
concepts that float around everywhere, but yeah.
Yeah. So exactly as you say, I think sometimes people feel hesitant to see a grief counselor because they worry that they want to feel better, but they don't want to get over their loss because they're worried about that getting over it means forgetting the person that they've lost, or dismissing this experience. And it's really important that people understand that, yeah, you don't get over grief. You learn to incorporate that into your life, but it never really goes away.
Yeah, that's right.
And
And
it's
I'm
not,
just, yeah,
sorry, I was just
sorry.
also going
No,
to say,
you go, you go. Yeah.
it's not as you say, a linear process. Like, it comes and goes. You'll have times where things are really hard. There'll be times where emotions, things seem pretty normal, and then sometimes emotions can just hit you out of the blue. It can be a really, really difficult process to go through.
And it's there's a lot of radical acceptance, isn't it, and compassion towards ourselves in that process. Because, like you said,
Yes.
sometimes you have days where it's okay. You can just live life, and then other days everything just comes to you and it's very overwhelming. And it's like that's
Yes.
okay, and that's all part of the process. So I think having someone to support you through that is really
Exactly.
important, and that's why your work is so essential for people.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
especially for people who have gone through, say, a divorce or a breakup, that's a really common response, where they might have a couple of weeks or a month where they're feeling really good and they're making lots of progress. And then they have a day where, maybe something reminds them, or they're just not feeling so great that day, and they get really emotional, and there'll be a lot of frustration because they'll say, "Oh, I made so much progress and I feel like I've slid backwards." It's about helping people to understand that that's all part of it. That's going to happen.
hmm
And
Would you have advice? I know we've touched upon this already, but for people who are like friends or family members of someone who is experiencing grief.
yes,
Mm,
I think the most important thing that I would say that people need to remember is it is so hard to watch somebody that we love in pain or grieving, but you have to allow them to feel it. Like, the
mm,
temptation can be to rush in and try and cheer them up, try to fix them, try to sort of push them out of what they're feeling. And most of the time, what people want is just somebody to be there with them and just let them feel what they're feeling. The most valuable thing that you can do is sit with them, give them a hug, put, hold their hand while they cry, listen to the stories that they have about the person that they've lost. Just being there is the most powerful thing you can do.
mm. And I think that's also why Honey Lemon is such a good character, and I understand
Yeah.
why she's your favorite. That she was that person. She was just present. She was very responsive to Hero's needs. She wasn't, like pushing for anything, and she was just allowing him to be. And obviously Aunt Cass as well. So these are really
Yes.
great animated characters with great life lessons to share. And speaking about relationships, I kind of, if it's okay with you, just wanted to talk a little bit about Up, because obviously that's kind of like the
Yeah.
go-to movie for people when it comes to grief. Was there anything
Yes.
about that specific film that you'd like to talk about today?
Yeah, Up is such a rich film. There is so much
Mm,
there to talk about. I love that Up, in a very short period of time, shows us quite a number of types of grief. Like, in that opening sequence, there are multiple losses that are depicted
mm,
in that little sequence, which I think is why so many people find it so powerful and so emotional. But I really love the way that in that movie, Carl is so defeated. Like, when we meet him, he is so isolated and he just wants to be on his own. And I love the way that he finds connection with somebody younger and who is so vibrant. And that reminds him of the beautiful connection that he and Ellie had. How adventurous and how gutsy she was. And it really
mm,
gives him the push to start, seeking out the adventures that she never got to have and that they didn't get to have together. I just think it's such a beautiful, beautiful film with so much to dive into.
Yes, yes. And what's the little boy's name again?
Russell.
Russell, yes,
Yeah.
Russell. So I feel like Russell is to Carl as Baymax is to Hero.
Exactly.
They're like these individual characters are kind of like the catalysts for change and for healing
Yeah.
for the other characters. Yeah. So I think in many ways, yeah, like it's just so touching and so heartwarming to see the impact of another person, like like a really genuine person who wants to just be there for you,
Yeah.
and not necessarily like lead you out of anything, but just be there for you. I think is so powerful.
Exactly. And especially in up, just because Russell is so motivated and he so desperately wants to help. He just wants to get in there and do. I I just love his energy because
Yeah,
he's so lovely.
he is, and he's like another version of Ellie in many ways, isn't he? So
A little
so
bit,
energetic,
yeah.
adventurous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because if you contrast Baymax and Hero with Carl and Russell, on the one hand, Baymax knew Tadashi, like he also
Mm,
has his own connection with Tadashi, whereas Russell never met Ellie. He doesn't know her,
yeah.
so all he knows of her is what either in photographs that he's seen or what Carl has shared with him. But
Hmm.
he still has such a sense of who she was and what was important to her. And I think it's lovely that, yeah, he kind of embodies a lot of those qualities as well and reminds Carl of how important they were to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and okay, this is a random question. So, but I'm very curious for people out there who want to become grief and loss counselors.
Yeah.
Would you have any, guidance or advice around that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think I would really, if it's something that you're interested in, I would very much encourage you to just start learning. Like
Mhm.
there are grief and loss courses that you can take. There are, lots of professional courses, but there are also so many books, so many podcasts that talk about grief. And I think one of the best things you can do is gain an understanding of all of the different types of grief. Like
Mhm.
hear different people's stories, because as I said, every loss is unique. Every time you experience grief, it's unique. And just gaining an appreciation for the strange and unexpected ways that it can show up means that you're more able to support people and less likely to be surprised when somebody comes to
Mm,
you. Because I think often when people come to a grief counselor, they might tell me something that they've experienced or something that they've felt, and they're like, "Oh, this feels really wrong and it feels really weird." And actually they'll tell me and I'll be like, that's not that weird. Like it
mm,
feels really weird
exactly.
to you because you haven't
Mm,
experienced it before, but in actuality that doesn't surprise me at all. Like you're not strange, you're just, this is unique to you.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and I guess in a way, it's comforting to know that grief and loss are universally human experiences, and
absolutely.
we all experience that to some extent through the course of
Yeah,
our lives, whatever it looks
yeah,
like. And I think it's really great to know within therapy that, yeah, that we are not alone and there are other people experiencing this, obviously in their own unique way, and we go through our
yeah,
own unique processes. But I think, that's so important to remember, because
yeah,
I guess it goes back to the whole, when we have experiences in our lives, we feel lonely and we feel like we're strange, or like we're the only ones who are, going through it. But
yeah.
actually, it is
It's
very universal.
absolutely. And to that point too, because if you're planning on becoming a grief counselor, chances are you have experienced grief in your life in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's really important to get get comfy with the grief that you've experienced, like
Mm-hmm.
become comfortable with your emotions, because I think there's a perception that if you do grief and loss counseling that you have to be emotionless, that you have to shut off those emotions, and that's not the case at all. Like there are times where I've cried with clients because their
Yeah.
story has touched me so much, and that's
Mhm.
perfectly okay. That's, you know, a good counselor is in touch with their own emotions. They're not just cold and hard and a blank slate. Like it's a reciprocal process.
Exactly. It's very hard to relate to a counselor if they have this kind of cold, unfeeling kind of demeanor, and it is
Yes.
more like people will actually open up to you more, like
Yeah,
knowing that you are responding in a human way. And I think that's so important,
exactly.
because I remember when I studied, sometimes there was a bit of an issue with crying with clients, but from the get-go, when I started working with people, I was like, no, like I am going to cry, like
It
that is going to
happens.
happen.
Yeah,
So, obviously if it was happening all the time, that would be an issue, but I think that there are certain moments where it's like, actually you will connect the most in this relationship with your client,
yeah,
if they know that actually you are experiencing this with them, and seeing them as a human being and relating to them as a human
absolutely.
being. So I
And
think,
it gives
that's really
them,
important. Mm.
yeah, for some people, it's really difficult for them to express emotions. Like crying in front of
Mhm.
another person can be so confronting for some people. And if they share a story with you that moves you to the point where you're getting misty eyed, sometimes that gives them permission to let
Mhm.
that go and to not be so guarded.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned that today, actually, because
Yeah.
I feel like that's still something that is in a way taboo. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention today, Vanessa?
I think we've covered everything that I
Mm.
made notes on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really good interviewing you again. I'm looking forward to our next one, which will be about
Me
horror.
too.
So probably
Yes.
there'll be a lot to talk about there. But thank you for choosing Big Hero 6. I really enjoyed the film. I'll definitely watch it again. And I will
Fantastic.
probably actually likely use it in my own sessions.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No problem.
The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClipper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.